biggest thing when we realized that Paul had died from suicide was absolute shock. My whole body reacted to it, and I lost track of time. It left me in a feeling of not feeling comfortable in my own skin.
I was gonna say, it can feel like the rug is pulled out from under you, but it's more than that. It's like the floor has been ripped away too. You have no foundation. You have nowhere to stand, and all you feel is the pain and the grief.
I think that certainly the first 6 months were mostly just a blur of just making it through the day. It was a lot of roller coaster emotions of, like, in some ways feeling more alive because everything felt so intense. But then the lows were really, really low, and it felt like sometimes this just up and down, and I felt so raw and vulnerable and exposed.
Paul was great. Paul was, he was smart, he was talented, he was funny, he was contemplative, he was sensitive, and he had no tolerance for BS though.
He always had this really cool sense of humor, almost a kind of a dry sense of humor. He takes after Dave, my husband Dave, in that regard.
We had the traditional dynamic of big sister, little brother, kind of. I thought he was annoying and he always wanted to hang out. But definitely as we got older, we really started to connect more and just like really, certainly had, we really liked music and got to talk about that and had more serious conversations, and really had a good relationship.
Sometimes Paul could be moody. There are times I worried about that a little bit, sometimes more than a little bit, but a lot of the time I really felt that he was going through the normal teenage relationship stuff, and that he was okay, which is one of the reasons it was really surprising when he did take his life by suicide.
I didn't know, is this typical teenage behavior? Is it severe depression? How do you distinguish between that?
He was not super communicative about some of the things that were going on. There was no diagnosed anything that was happening at that time though. So retrospect can see maybe there was some deeper stuff that he was actually willing to really share, but it's not that he didn't have the opportunities to share, it's just I think he didn't know how to.
What I wish is that we talked about mental health issues. We'd make that dinner table conversations. We would talk about suicide. I would ask questions, maybe not in relation to Paul, but ask questions about his friends. Does he see, is anybody experiencing any kind of depression, and hopefully lead that. 13 years ago, I was of the belief that if you talk about suicide, then you put the idea in a person's head. And I've come to absolutely know that that is such a myth. So after Paul had died, those days and weeks, and really the week leading up to his memorial service, people kept coming to our house and they wanted to do whatever they could, and it was wonderful.
Fortunately for us, we had people that were very supportive and knew how to be with us, knew how to support us, and not necessarily try to fix us, because be there with us and be there within our grief. We had friends and family and neighbors even that were very supportive that way, and that's one of the things that helped us a lot.
When he died, I actually it was my first week of college, and I had just moved to Oregon a few weeks before that, so I ended up flying home the next day and was here in town for a while. I did end up deciding to go back to school and finish out the semester, which I don't know if that was a good choice or not, but it was definitely something that just kept me occupied. I felt like I was going to go crazy if I stayed here and didn't do anything.
So after the initial shock and that flurry of activity that happens with a loss, with death, then you're left with the challenge of, how do I put my life back together again? And it's hard. I think for me, I think the thing that was most meaningful and most helpful for me, at least early on in that process, was to see that there are actually other people who've been through this and survived it, and were living their life and finding meaning and be able to find some joy and stuff too. That was helpful, to know it can be done.
The challenges that were there for me specifically was that I felt like I should have been in this, I'm starting college, I'm in the best time of my life, everything's new and exciting. But the challenge was that I did feel this aloneness of I'm going through something that feels like everyone else around me has, they're the carefree, hanging out and having fun and going to college, where I felt like I was missing out on that, and felt like I couldn't really talk to people about it either. And it was a bunch of new people too, and it's not like that easily comes up in conversation, like, hey, by the way, my brother just died.
For me, that guilt and the coulda, shoulda, wouldas, oh, what did I see, what didn't I see, what should I have done, what could I have done? I felt that guilt kept me prisoner. I heard a person talk about reframing that word guilt into regret. And I have to tell you, it just took away, I remember just breathing, saying, yeah, we all have regrets. I regret that I didn't speak of suicide. I regret that we didn't talk about mental health issues. These are things that I regret.
As a family, we definitely did grieve in different ways. I think my dad and I tended to be a little more quieter in our grief, wanting a little more solitude. I think my mom wanted to talk with more people and be more engaged socially, and I think there was certainly I'm sure there was some conflict. I don't actually remember a lot of what it was.
Chris and I did grieve differently. And we were able to recognize that and realizing we weren't grieving the same. There were some challenges along the way.
It's hard. There were many times that I looked at Dave, and Dave seemed to be so much more together than I was, and I was jealous of that. And so I was comparing. I was comparing his grief to my grief, and there's no right or wrong way here. It was a few years after Paul had died, we were finding that the two of us, Paul's parents, the closest people to him, couldn't talk about Paul. It was like Paul was that elephant in the room. I would go to my support groups, Dave would do what he needed to do, but we weren't able to come together until we made the decision to go to counseling. And it was the best thing that we could have done.
I think the uniqueness of sibling loss is that it feels even more invisible from parental loss. I feel like we don't hear about that as much. And there are just unique challenges with especially being, going from being a sibling to an only child and just some family dynamics in there. I think I felt like I kind of had to hold space for my parents too, and like watching them go through that was heartbreaking, and there's a lot to it. And I think that, I would get questions a lot of like, oh, how's your mom? Or these things are like, well, I mean, she's not good either, but also I'm not good. Like I have my own loss in this too. And yeah, I think it's just harder for younger people going through that to even have the spaces to talk about things.
I will remember Paul throughout the day, still. And there can be little things that remind me of that. And there's a joy to that when those moments come. And that's one of the ways I think I still experience a relationship with him. I mean, there's still the edge of grief, underlying all that. But yeah, you can experience joyful memories. You can experience peace after a loss.
Yeah, so the grief definitely has evolved over time. I think what makes it easier is that for me, I got accustomed to, oh, this is what it feels like when like a wave is coming. It's what it would feel like, this like wave of emotion. And instead of resisting it, I would just like accept that it was coming and I've been through it before, I'm gonna get through it again. And that made it a little more palatable. And I think just over time that softens for me.
Paul's life may have ended here on earth 13 and a half years ago, but his story continues with my being open and talking about suicide, being open and talking about mental health issues, and that has brought much meaning into my life.